Madam President, we often discuss around here bureaucracy and regulation and overreach and government getting out of the way. And I want to point out what, to me, and bring to the attention of the Senate and the American people, one of the most ridiculous actions of any government at any level that I have ever encountered. There is a wonderful program that provides support for students going on to college, particularly low-income students, and particularly in rural areas. And every year, our colleges and colleges across the country file applications for this program called Upward Bound. It's one of the most successful programs of the federal government that I've encountered. I've met the students in Maine and from other parts of the country. It is a program that helps these students to make the transition from their communities to colleges and to gain a college education. Applications are necessary, and applications have rules about the size of the paper and that kind of thing. But this one, what has happened in this case on the application of the University of Maine at Presque Isle, affectionately called UMPI, the University of Maine at Presque Isle filed its application, 65 pages, met all the requirements, but they made a terrible mistake because the rules of the Department of Education say that the application must be double-spaced. And indeed, the application is double-spaced, except for an exhibit on page 21, which is single-spaced. Double-spaced in the body of the application, and there was one other infographic in the application, which was a space and a half, 1.5 instead of 2, and the application was rejected for that reason alone. This is preposterous. This isn't a game. This isn't gotcha. This is about real people. At the University of Maine at Presque Isle, it's 129 real people. And it's about their access to higher education, their access to a better life, their ability to achieve success. 129 people the application of their university was rejected because this little piece on one page and a similar piece on another page was 1.5 spaces instead of 2. This is nonsense. This is the kind of thing that makes people hate government. This is the kind of thing that makes people say, what are they thinking down there? What's wrong with Washington? Why can't they get something so simple as looking at the substance of the application instead of applying what can only be characterized as a bureaucratic rule? Now, I don't come to the floor. I'm not one of these people who attacks bureaucrats and federal workers. In my experience, they are good people who are trying to do the right thing. And they make enormous contributions to our country. But in this case, somebody somewhere in the Department of Education made a dumb decision. And it's one that is going to impact my people in Maine. And I can't just keep quiet about it. Now, last week, after letters from the Maine congressional delegation, which I will place into the record, the Department of Education announced, well, it probably wasn't the right thing to do. This wasn't a very good policy. I guess we made a mistake. The problem is it doesn't help UMPI. It only helps people in the future. Now, I've worked with my colleague, Senator Collins, on this. She has done research. Her office has discovered precedents where, indeed, this kind of thing has happened before, and they fixed it. And they fixed it so that the application could be considered. And by the way, the decision on these applications around the country has not been made yet. So we're not prejudicing anybody. We're not making a change after the fact. All they have to do is go to page 1 of the UMPI application and read it. And forget about the fact that it's 1.5 spaces in this little exhibit in the middle of the double-spaced application. In fact, we can fix it. We'll make this double space. I feel silly even coming to the floor of the U.S. Senate talking about this. Double space, 1.5 spaces. What are we doing here? And again, the reason I'm so passionate about this is these are real people's lives. These are 129 young people who won't be able to take part in this program. And very likely, their entire lives can be compromised by this. This is a big deal for them. Maybe a little deal for the Department of Education, but it's a big deal for the University of Maine at Presque Isle and their students. So all I'm asking is for the Department of Education and the Secretary of Education to look at this obvious, ridiculous, bureaucratic mistake, correct it, and correct it for those who have been prejudiced by it. And it's not just the University of Maine at Presque Isle. I understand there are a number of others across the country whose applications were kicked out for similar reasons. Now, I understand there has to be some uniformity. You know, it has to be written in English and has to be on, you know, reasonable paper that you can read, and it, you know, it's not handwritten. But to reject an application involving 129 young lives in my state because a little piece out of a 65-page application has 1.5 spaces instead of 2? Give me a break. This is something that can and should be fixed. And I assume and believe that the Secretary of Education and the people in charge of the Department of Education will find a way to fix it and to prove to the people of Maine that the government in Washington is not crazy and that we can make reasonable decisions. And when we make a mistake, and they acknowledged last week that it was a mistake, that it was not good policy, and they've rectified it going forward, but let's admit the mistake and relieve those who have been impacted by that mistake of its weight, of the obstacle that it places in the way of young people's opportunities. Madam President, I understand that this issue has arisen in Montana, Wisconsin, Arkansas, West Virginia, New Jersey, Ohio, Washington, Delaware, Alabama, Illinois, California, New York, Massachusetts, and Florida, and Maine. And it's time that it's addressed. It ought to be very simple, and it ought to be taken care of in a matter of days, not weeks or months, but in a matter of days, so those young people and so our university can plan and implement and move forward in their mission to enrich and enable the lives of our citizens. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the letters submitted to the Department of Education by the Maine congressional delegation on this subject be admitted into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe that this is a simple case that could be easily rectified, and I'm confident, I'm almost confident, that it will be. I trust that common sense will prevail and the well-being of our students will be put above minor technical issues in an application that's so important. Thank you, Madam President. I note the absence of a quorum.